You remember we were watching, was it Bound for Glory?
Yes, it was.
And Jonathan and I were trying to find our way around at night, and it was disaster. And Joshu Fonda says the same thing. I don't know if anybody else has a problem finding this place.
Yes, everybody, all our friends that usually come here, they usually always, at least the first time, they always have trouble finding it here. They usually park like behind, and we always got to tell them, no, you can just park in the front. But
well,
that's how it goes.
At least we're finally here. And when I walked in, you were watching the latest edition of NXT.
Yes.
Samoa Joe and Eric Young were the main event. And right before that was an Austin Aries interview. And Bobby Roode is showing up. So basically, it's NXT at this point, I think.
Yeah, maybe. Saying TNA isn't doing what they're supposed to do. The talent's going to leave and go elsewhere,
Well, since we just started on the pro wrestling thing, because I know you're a wrestling fan too, how'd you get into pro wrestling? Was that before martial arts or after?
Before, like usually most wrestling fans, you start out as a kid. I probably want to say I was at least four or five, watching, was it the main event, Saturdays or Superstars on Saturday at the time, watching Hulk Hogan, The Ultimate Warrior, and then, watching pay-per-views here and there, and just been a fan ever since.
Do you find this with a lot of MMA fighters? You hear sometimes like BJ Penn will mention like, come on, get up like Hulk Hogan. And there is a cross section over there at various points throughout its history in different countries too. Do you find that a lot of MMA fans are wrestling fans too, or at least were when they were younger? Or is it the more like, oh, that's the fake stuff?
I kind of want to say it's the first one. It's where, most of us are fans, because usually every kid, I don't care what they say, probably was a wrestling fan at one point in their life, and then as they got older, they just got away. To me, everybody was a fan once in their life, even if they deny it. Like certain people I know behind us.
Joshu's wife, Carissa, is over here joining us, and we're usually getting together to watch UFCs at Tilt-A-Kilt or wherever. And a lot of wrestling fans may have gotten their first glimpses from back in the day in the Attitude Era, of course, Ken Shamrock, and later on Brock Lesnar. In Japan, it's much more muddy water. And now we're still waiting on CM Punk's debut. And every time UFC specifically, but also Bellator with Bobby Lashley and Kurt Angle making appearances and things like that, you think there's going to be a whole flood of new fans coming in to the sport of MMA. And I know there was a term years ago, graduating, when someone would basically get too old for wrestling and they wanted something more real and mature and whatever, and then they go over to MMA. But it seems to me that, yes, when Brock was fighting, he would do huge numbers on pay-per-view. That's why they signed CM Punk to do the same thing. But it seems to me that every wave of wrestling fans tuning over to check out their guy fighting doesn't really stick around per se. Am I wrong in that?
I kind of want to say yes and no, because I think really what it is, you're right. It's like, that's their guy. They're tuning into MMA to watch at their time their favorite wrestler, or to see how this wrestler does in this new adventure. Some people maybe at the time, they might get hooked and be like, oh, I like it. Or some people are just like, that's not for me. I'm just tuning in for this person. It's the same thing as in Ronda Rousey. She gets the casual woman,
right?
Like I tell you, when we go out to watch the fights, if it's Ronda Rousey, I see a lot of women out there. I'm like, where did they come from?
Right.
And then when she's not fighting, I don't see that many women. So it's one of those things where it's like, they're just there to support that one person. If they're not involved, they don't care about it. Same thing with Conor McGregor as well. He's big. Irish are coming out for him, but if there's no other Irishmen on there, they're not thinking about it. Brazilians as well, if Anderson Silva or Vitor or your Big Nog, Ludanog is fighting, they're going to be out there to support. But they're not on there, then they're not really showing up.
And where do you think the crossover comes into play? Because I used to say this for years, and I did on the roundtable, that when I was a kid and I'd go to the library, because that was before YouTube and DVDs and all that other stuff, that the category would be boxing and wrestling when you're looking up pro wrestling books or whatever in the library. And I figured at some point it's going to be boxing, wrestling, and MMA. So obviously they're all combat sports, wrestling being the scripted one out of it, but it's the same sort of concept. That's what I would always try to get through to people who told me, oh, it's apples and oranges. And in many respects, obviously, yes. But at the end of the day, the story is it's one person fighting another person for a belt, and that's the concept. Do you think that there is a big crossover from pro wrestling into martial arts and vice versa?
It depends on the person. It can be, because I am a fan of combat sports, which means I watch boxing, I watch MMA, I watch kickboxing, I like wrestling. But then there are just people who are just certain fans of that one thing. Like, for instance, like you've had to talk about boxing and MMA fans, how they don't go together. Like, old boxing heads don't watch MMA.
Right.
They stay in their lane. Same thing with MMA fans. They don't cross over and watch boxing. Even though boxing has been around for so many years, we've had all these great boxers and everything like that. And everybody wants to compare which one is better than the other. But somebody like me and rest of combat sports fans, like a Jimmy Smith from the commentator for Bellator, he'll say himself, he's a combat sports fan. He likes to watch just combat, doesn't matter what it is.
Or Mauro Ranallo.
Yeah, exactly.
He's all over everything.
Yeah, exactly. With us, we're all wrestling fans, boxing fans, kickboxing, and we'll watch it all because it's just combat sports that we love. While some people, like I say, they just watch certain things. It's the same thing like with me in regular sports. Like, I'll watch football, I'll watch hockey. Those are my two main ones. Basketball, I'll watch here and there. And then baseball, I'm not really watching unless somebody says, hey, want to go to a baseball game, and I'll be sure I'll go check it out because at least it's live. I don't have to watch it on TV where I might doze off on my couch.
When Dana White had his catchphrase, basically, or his tagline, his selling point for years, that everybody loves a fight. Everyone's going to tune in for a fight. And when wrestling fans will be like, I like my storylines and gimmicks and characters and this and that. Yes, but I think back to specifically the Brawl for All, which is notorious in the wrestling circles, like it was supposed to be a disaster and this and that. But I was actually there for two fights. The first Raw at the Meadowlands. Now it was the IZOD. I think IZOD shut down, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Yeah. Well, back then it was the Continental Airlines Arena.
Yep.
And
that place.
This was 98, and there were two Brawl for Alls, and I think there was a knockout. Now, up until then, the wrestling fans booed and they were chanting, boring, we want wrestling, this and that. But all of a sudden, there's a knockout and they pop.